Hello, everyone. Tonight, we dive into a story filled with emotions and unexpected twists. A life, a family, and the secrets hidden behind a perfect facade. You might think this could never happen to you, but sometimes life has a way of surprising us in ways we never saw coming. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And if you'd like, drop a comment with your location and time zone so I can see just how far this story has spread. Now go ahead and turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some background noise, and let's start tonight's journey together. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my dining room as I set the good china for lunch. I had received a call from Lily earlier in the day. Her voice was unusually tight and she asked if we could meet, just the two of us. Something in the way she spoke made my stomach twist with anxiety, but I pushed it aside. Lily was my daughter-in-law's older sister, and while we had always been polite, we weren't exactly close. I smoothed my hands over the cream-colored linen tablecloth I had used for family gatherings for the last 30 years. At 64, I still took pride in maintaining these traditions, creating a home that always felt welcoming. The house had been too quiet lately, just me rattling around in it. Damon, my husband of 42 years, had been distant for months, always finding excuses to work late or retreat to his study. Wade, our 35-year-old son, was so wrapped up in his marriage to Ember, my daughter-in-law, that his visits had become more of a formality than a real connection. The doorbell chimed, pulling me out of my thoughts. When I opened the door, I found Lily standing on my front steps, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked pale, her makeup smeared around her eyes as if she had been crying. "Nan, thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course, dear. Come in. Come in." I greeted her, ushering her inside. I led her to the dining room, noticing the slight tremor in her hands as she set down her purse. "I made your favorite cucumber sandwiches and the lemon cake you loved last Easter." She gave a weak smile but didn't touch the food. Instead, she stared down at her hands, her knuckles white with tension. "Lily, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," I said, my voice full of concern. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her green eyes that made my blood run cold, pain, guilt, and beneath it all, a desperate kind of love. "Nayan, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without destroying everything," she whispered. My heart began to race, but I kept my voice steady. "Whatever it is, we can work through it together." Lily let out a shaky breath and tears started pooling in her eyes. "It's about Ember and Damon." The room tilted slightly, but I forced myself to stay calm. I folded my hands carefully in my lap. "What about them?" "They're having an affair." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if she had been holding them in for too long. "I've known for weeks. I saw them together at that little cafe downtown, the one near Damon's office. They were holding hands, kissing, acting like lovers." I felt something inside me crack, like ice breaking on a frozen pond, but my voice remained steady. "Are you sure?" Lily nodded miserably. I confronted Ember about it. She didn't even try to deny it. She just laughed and said it wasn't any of my business. "But Nayan, the things she said about you." I felt my heart constrict in my chest. "What things?" "She said you were old and boring, that Damon deserved better. She said once the divorce was final, she'd make sure you got as little as possible." Lily continued, her voice breaking. "She's been planning this, Nayan. The whole thing. She married Wade to get close to the family, to the money. She's been working on Damon for months." I felt the room spin around me, but I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. 42 years of marriage, a son I had raised with love, a daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my home. All of it crumbling because of greed and betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. Lily reached across the table, taking my hand. "Because it's wrong. Because you've been nothing but kind to our family, and you don't deserve this." because Wade doesn't deserve to be married to someone who's capable of this level of deception. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And because I love my nephew, and I can't stand watching Ember destroy everything good in this family. I stared down at our joined hands, my own wrinkled and spotted with age, her smooth and young. Does Wade know? I asked. No, and I don't know if I should tell him. It would destroy him. I pulled my hand free from hers and stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden Damon and I had planted together in our early years. The roses were in full bloom, their red petals bright against the green foliage. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, but underneath the roots were rotting. What will you do? Lily asked behind me. I turned back to her and something inside me had shifted. The initial shock was giving way to something cooler, more calculating. I had spent my entire life taking care of others, smoothing over problems, keeping the peace. But this wasn't something that could be smoothed over. Nothing, I said calmly. Lily's eyes widened. Nothing. I'm going to pretend I never heard this conversation, I replied, my voice steady. I'm going to smile and play the devoted wife and mother, and I'm going to let them think they're winning. But Naen, I trailed off, my gaze hardening. Some games require patience, and I've been patient for a very long time. I sat back down at the table and poured myself a cup of tea, my hand steady. Tell me, does Ember know you're here? No, she thinks I'm at work. Good. It needs to stay that way, I said, locking eyes with her. She must have seen something in my expression that surprised her because she sat back slightly. Can you do that for me? Can you pretend you never told me? Lily nodded slowly. But what about Wade? What about your marriage? I took a sip of tea, my movements calm and deliberate, my mind already working through the next steps. Some battles aren't won by charging in with guns blazing. Dear, sometimes you have to let your enemies think they've already won. Lily looked at me in stunned silence, but I could see a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. After Lily left, I spent the rest of the afternoon staring out into the garden, thinking of everything she had told me. I had always known something wasn't right, but to hear it confirmed in such a way, well, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. Every smile Damon flashed me, every touch that seemed just a little too rehearsed, now suddenly made sense. Ember had been playing her game for months, and I had been none the wiser, focusing on the small, everyday things that made up my life, thinking everything was fine. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing the harsh truths that had been right under my nose all along. That evening, Damon came home as usual, his briefcase in hand, a forced smile on his face. He kissed me on the cheek, asking about dinner with a tone that didn't quite match the usual warmth. It was clear something had shifted, but neither of us acknowledged it. I had learned long ago that silence could be as powerful as words, and tonight I had no intention of breaking it. I had already prepared his favorite dinner, roast chicken with potatoes, carrots, and a simple green salad. It was the same meal I had made every Thursday for 40 years, a tradition that had been the cornerstone of our marriage. We ate in relative silence, the clinking of silverware and the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sounds filling the air. Damon was preoccupied, glancing at his phone every few minutes, his mind clearly somewhere else. I didn't mind. I was more concerned with what lay ahead, with the knowledge of his betrayal eating at me from the inside. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, Damon attempted to act as if everything was normal. He kissed me goodnight, his lips cold and distant, and I didn't return the kiss. Instead, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything heavy on my chest. I thought about Lily's words about Ember's betrayal, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I was going to play my role as the unsuspecting wife until the right moment came, and then I would strike. The next day, I called my lawyer. Not the family attorney Damon and I had always used, but a woman named Karen Douglas, someone who specialized in high-stakes divorces. She had a reputation for being tough, and I needed someone who could help me navigate what was coming. We scheduled an appointment for the following week, but I was already mentally preparing myself for the battle ahead. As I prepared breakfast the next morning, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow across the kitchen, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. Damon came into the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee greeting him as he rubbed his eyes. He gave me a half smile and a quiet, "Good morning, Pa." But I said nothing in return. Instead, I continued preparing breakfast, my movements slow and deliberate. "Nan, can we talk?" he asked, his voice tentative. I looked up at him, my expression carefully neutral. "About what?" He hesitated as if unsure of how to approach the topic. "About us. About what's been happening lately." I could feel my pulse quicken, but I kept my voice steady. "What's been happening lately?" "You know," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table, the distance between us. The silence. It's like we're not even really a couple anymore. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. He had no idea what was coming, no idea how close he was to losing everything. "Damon," I said softly, "sometimes people grow apart. Maybe that's what's happening here." He looked at me confused. "You don't seem upset. Aren't you upset?" I smiled gently, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Damon, I'm not upset. I think after 42 years, we've both earned the right to feel however we want. If you found happiness with someone else, that's your decision. I'm not going to stand in your way." His face twisted with confusion and something like guilt, but it was brief. He quickly masked it, replacing it with the same smug confidence he'd had for months. "So you're saying you're okay with this, with us?" I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I think it's time we face the truth. Maybe this marriage has run its course." He sat there for a long moment, staring at me, as if trying to gauge my sincerity. I didn't flinch, didn't show any hint of the hurt I was feeling deep down. If he wanted a divorce, I would give it to him, but on my terms, not his. That afternoon, Lily came by again. She looked more at ease this time, her shoulders less tense. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly as she sat down across from me. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm doing what needs to be done. I've already contacted a lawyer." She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You're that sure about it?" "I'm sure," I replied, my voice calm. "I've been living in a lie for too long. It's time to put an end to it." Lily nodded, her expression softening. "I'm proud of you, Nayan. You've got this." I smiled at her, grateful for her support. "We'll see." I woke up the next morning, the light of the new day filtering through the blinds, bringing with it a sense of clarity that I hadn't had in weeks. Last night, Damon had left for a business dinner again, another one of his increasingly frequent excuses. It was clear now he wasn't working late. He was with her. Ember, my daughter-in-law. The woman who had stolen my husband's heart and in doing so had shattered everything I'd known. I tried to push the gnawing bitterness aside. The world didn't need my bitterness. I didn't need to stew in it. If anything, I had learned through this ordeal that strength came not from resisting the truth, but from embracing it, facing it head on, and using it to my advantage. After I got out of bed, I went through my usual morning routine, preparing breakfast as I had for the past 42 years. There was something oddly comforting in the normalcy of it all, cutting the fruit for the oatmeal, brewing the coffee, just the way Damon liked it, setting the table for two. The scent of fresh bread filled the house as I set out the toast and scrambled eggs, even though I knew Damon wouldn't be there to eat it. There was a subtle shift in the air, a thick tension that seemed to hang between me and the walls of the house. I hadn't realized until that moment just how much I'd been holding on to this house, my home, our home, thinking it was a sanctuary, when in fact It had been a prison for years, but no more. I was going to fight for what was mine, for the integrity of the life I had built, and for my dignity, which I had allowed to slip into the shadows for too long. The decision had been made. By the time my lawyer, Karen, arrived in the late morning, I felt more at peace with my decision than ever. She was sharp, methodical, and ready to go to bat for me, no matter the cost. I had chosen her for her reputation. She didn't waste time or pull punches, and I didn't need anything less. I could feel the weight of her gaze when she stepped through the door, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was the only one carrying the load. Nayen, she greeted me warmly, but her sharp eyes quickly took in the serious nature of our meeting. "How are you holding up?" I smiled tightly. "I've been better, but I'm doing what I need to do now, what I should have done a long time ago." Karen sat down at the kitchen table, flipping through her legal pad. She made a few notes, her pen tapping lightly against the paper as she scanned over the details I had provided. Then her gaze flicked back to me. "So what's the game plan?" she asked, already knowing. I looked her directly in the eye. "We go after everything. I want to make sure that Damon and Ember don't get away with what they've done, and I want to make sure my rights are protected. I'm not just a victim in all of this. I've spent too long allowing people to make decisions for me, but not anymore." Karen's lips twitched into a brief smile. "I like the sound of that. Let's talk specifics. We need to pull everything together, your assets, the trust, and most importantly, the divorce papers. Once we have that, we'll prepare for court." By the time she left, the plan was in motion. I had no illusions about how messy things were going to get, but the groundwork had been laid. I knew that Damon and Ember would try to play their usual games of manipulation and deceit. But what they didn't realize was that I had my own set of cards, and I wasn't going to play them lightly. The next day, when Damon returned home, I was ready. He came through the door like nothing had changed, his usual aloof, self-assured manner still intact. The phone calls, the constant meetings, the time away from home, it was all so perfectly scripted. It was like I wasn't even there. "Hey," he greeted me as he kicked off his shoes, heading for the kitchen. "Hello," I responded, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't feel the need to engage with his fake cheerfulness. "Anything good for dinner?" he asked, as if nothing had shifted in our world. I looked at him steady and calm. "There's food, if you're hungry," I said simply. "But we need to talk." Damon froze. I could feel the shift in the air, the tension. He stood there for a moment, trying to assess what I meant, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. For years, I had let him slide by with his excuses, with his infidelities, with his lies. But that was over. "I know what's been going on, Damon," I said, my voice low but firm. His face went pale, and for the first time I saw a flicker of real fear in his eyes. But he quickly covered it up, replacing it with his usual dismissive smile. "Don't be ridiculous, Nayen," he said, trying to brush it off. "You don't know what you're talking about." I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I know everything, Damon. Everything. About you and Ember, and about how you've been trying to play me for a fool." For a long moment, there was silence between us. The years of deceit hung heavy in the air, and it felt like everything that had ever mattered to me had been flipped upside down. Damon wasn't the man I had married. Ember wasn't the woman I had welcomed into my family. And the life we had built together was a lie, a house of cards waiting to fall. "What are you going to do about it?" he finally asked, his voice shaky now, as if he were losing control of the situation for the first time in decades. "I'm not doing anything," I said, my voice calm but filled with certainty. "You're doing this to yourselves. I've already made my decisions. You think I don't know about the divorce papers, about the trust, about everything? I've already got a lawyer, Damon. This is over." The color drained from his face, and he stood there for a long time, stunned by my words. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to figure out what his next move would be. The truth was, Damon had underestimated me for too long. He had thought that I would be the one to back down, to cry, to plead. He was wrong. I wasn't the naive woman I had been all those years ago. I had learned, I had grown, and I had something he and Ember couldn't understand: the quiet power of patience. I've already taken steps. I added my tone final. And when this is over, you and Ember will learn exactly how much you've underestimated me. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and an unnerving quiet that settled over the house. Damon and I passed each other in the hallways, exchanging only the most formal of pleasantries. There was no warmth left between us, no connection. It was as if the years we had spent together had evaporated in the face of betrayal, leaving nothing but the remnants of a relationship long dead. Karen, my lawyer, had assured me that everything was in motion. The trust, the divorce papers, and all the assets, everything I needed to protect myself and my future was being handled. I had done everything by the book. The clauses in my grandfather's trust were clear: the house, the family legacy, would never belong to Damon or Ember. If the marriage was dissolved due to adultery, the offending party lost all rights to the assets. I didn't need to fight for the house. It was mine by right, a legacy that Damon and Ember could never take away, no matter how hard they tried. But that didn't mean they would back down easily. If anything, I knew their plan had just begun to unfold. Ember would never accept defeat without a fight. She was used to getting what she wanted, used to manipulating those around her. And now that she thought the home would soon be hers, I knew she wouldn't let go without a struggle. One morning, I woke up to find an unfamiliar letter on the dining room table. The envelope was sleek, with a name printed in bold black letters: Miller and Associates, legal advisors for Damon Morrison. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it carefully, scanning the contents. The letter was from Damon's new attorney, a man named Gregory Miller, who seemed to be insinuating that the division of assets in the divorce would be contested. They wanted to challenge the provisions of the trust, claiming that my grandfather's will had been misinterpreted and that certain clauses were open to interpretation. It was an attempt to rewrite the rules to claim what wasn't rightfully theirs. I could feel the heat rising in my chest as I read. They were starting to make their move. I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. I immediately contacted Karen and we scheduled an emergency meeting. I needed to be ready. They were playing a dangerous game, but they didn't know that I had already anticipated every move they would make. That afternoon, I met Karen at her office. The building was imposing, a tall structure that towered over the street, a testament to her skill and success. Inside, the walls were lined with legal books, framed degrees, and certificates of achievement. It was all business here, and I was grateful for the professionalism that Karen exuded. She was the type of lawyer who didn't mince words and didn't back down. "I take it you've seen their letter?" she asked, her eyes scanning the document I handed her. She was already assessing the situation, calculating her next steps. "I've seen it," I replied, my voice steady. "And I'm not backing down. I need to make sure this is handled the right way. They're trying to take what's mine." Karen nodded, a slight frown pulling at her lips. They're not going to let go easily, especially if they think there's a way to challenge the trust. But don't worry, we'll make sure the courts see things our way. We'll put up a fight. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders just by having Karen on my side. "What's the next step?" "We need to prepare for a court battle," Karen said, glancing at her notes. "We'll need to subpoena records and gather all the evidence we can find. And I'll start preparing for the possibility of a legal challenge to the trust. But if they think they can take what's rightfully yours, just because they want it, they're sorely mistaken." The meeting ended with Karen's promise to move forward quickly and decisively. I felt more confident than I had in days. The battle was far from over, but now I wasn't facing it alone. I had a plan. And I had a lawyer who wasn't afraid to fight for me. 2 days later, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was Wade. His voice sounded strained, as though he had been holding something back. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said, his tone unusual. There was an edge to his words, something I couldn't quite place. "Of course, sweetheart. What's going on?" I've been hearing things, he said, his voice faltering. Things I wish I didn't have to hear. About Dad, about Ember. My heart sank. I could feel the dread rising inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "What things, Wade?" "I know about the affair," he said bluntly, "and I know about the plan to sell the house. They've been talking about it behind your back." I didn't know what to say at first. The words felt like a blow, and I could sense the pain in his voice. "I'm so sorry, Wade," I finally said. "You didn't deserve this. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to involve you. It's been hard for me too, It's not your fault, Mom," he replied quickly. I just didn't realize how far they were going with this. Ember was going to take everything, wasn't she?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. She thought she could. She thought I wouldn't fight for it, but I'm not going to let them take what's mine. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought Wade had hung up. But then he spoke again, his voice more determined. "I'm going to help you," he said. "I'm not going to sit back and let them destroy everything you've worked for. I'm going to make sure they pay for what they've done." I could hear the resolve in his words, and it gave me the strength I needed to push forward. Wade had always been the good son, the one who believed in fairness and loyalty. But now I realized he was going to be the ally I never knew I needed. We were in this together. "I'm glad you're with me," I said quietly. "But we need to be careful. Ember and Damon won't hesitate to fight dirty. We have to be smart." "I'll make sure of it," Wade promised. "I'll get all the information we need. You just focus on staying strong." As we ended the call, I felt a flicker of hope. Wade was my son, my blood, and no matter what happened, we would face it together. That night, when Damon returned home, I could see the anxiety in his eyes. He had expected me to fold, to give up, but I wasn't going to let him get away with his lies and betrayal. "Nayen, we need to talk," Damon said, standing in the doorway of the living room. I turned to face him, my posture as stiff as the tension that hung between us. "What is there left to talk about?" He looked taken aback by my bluntness. "About the divorce, about the house." I crossed my arms over my chest. "You've made your move, Damon. You've made your choice. But you and Ember can't have it all, not anymore." His eyes darkened, and for a moment I saw the man I had once loved, the man who had fooled me for so long. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the man who had betrayed me. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "I doubt it," I replied coldly. As he turned and walked away, I stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. But this time I didn't feel the crushing sense of defeat. This time I was in control. The fight was on, and I wasn't going to lose. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Karen worked tirelessly to prepare for the looming battle. We had already gathered the necessary documents and evidence to back up my claims about the trust, the infidelity, and the fraudulent attempts to manipulate the estate. There was no stone left unturned. But as much as the preparations took up my time, it was the quiet moments in between that gave me the most peace. Early mornings when I could sit in the garden with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, feeling the weight of my decisions settle around me like a familiar blanket. It was a strange kind of solace knowing that the hardest part was behind me. But the fight for my future wasn't over yet. The next chapter had only just begun. Wade and I talked often. He had become my sounding board, my confidant, and my strength. Each day I could sense him growing stronger, more determined. He had become a force to be reckoned with, and I wasn't sure I could have gotten this far without his support. Ember, on the other hand, had grown increasingly desperate. She began making surprise visits to the house, each time dressed in a new outfit, her every movement carefully calculated to project an image of control. She would stand in the doorway, her eyes sweeping over the house, as though claiming it for herself. It was unsettling the way she tried to assert dominance, but I stood firm. I was not going to let her take what didn't belong to her. One afternoon, just as I was about to head to Karen's office for an update, Wade walked into the kitchen with a look on his face that made my heart drop. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker, more urgent. "Mom," he said, his voice tense, "you need to sit down." I felt a wave of unease wash over me. "What's wrong?" "I don't know how to say this." Wade began running a hand through his hair. "But I've been going through some of the things I found after Ember left. There are more documents. Hidden ones. She was planning on making a move against you, and I think we might have underestimated her." I took a seat at the table, my hands gripping the edges. "What kind of documents?" "Insurance policies. Not just the one she forged for you. She had papers prepared to claim assets in your name. She was already planning on how to move the money around when the time came. She didn't want the divorce to go through the way it should." Wade explained, his eyes filled with disbelief. "She thought she could make you disappear quietly, Mom. Just like that." I was quiet for a moment, processing what he had said. Ember's greed was something I had known about, but hearing the details of her calculated manipulation sent a cold chill down my spine. She had gone so far as to prepare everything every angle covered in case I fought back. "We have to get those documents into Karen's hands," I said finally, my voice resolute. "Everything she's done, every move she's made, it's all part of a bigger picture. She's playing a game she doesn't understand." Wade nodded, his face grim. "I'm going to take them to her office now. We'll make sure they're added to the case." As Wade left, I sat there in silence, staring out the window at the garden that had always been my sanctuary. It was still beautiful, still full of life. But the beauty of it was now overshadowed by the darkness that Ember had brought into our lives. She thought she could take everything, but I wasn't about to let that happen. The following week, the tension between Damon and me reached new heights. He began calling more frequently, his voice tinged with anger and frustration, demanding to know why I wasn't simply signing the divorce papers and walking away. He couldn't fathom why I wasn't as eager as Ember to move on. It was strange how quickly everything had changed. How in just a matter of weeks, he had become a stranger to me. The man I had loved for 42 years was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of someone I no longer recognized. He was consumed by his own guilt, but he wore it like a badge of honor, convinced that he had done nothing wrong. I ignored his calls for the most part. When he did manage to get through, I kept my responses brief, cold, and to the point. There was no more pretending, no more playing the role of the devoted wife. He had made his choices, and now he had to deal with the consequences. It was late one night, about a week after Wade had brought in the documents, that I received a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was Karen. "Nayen," she said, her voice serious. "I've reviewed everything. The evidence, the trust documents, the insurance policies, and the fraudulent activities you mentioned. We're moving forward with the case. But I want you to know one thing. This is going to get messy. Ember will fight us every step of the way, and Damon will try to manipulate the situation to his advantage. We have to be ready for whatever comes next." "I'm ready," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I've waited this long. What's a little more fight?" "I know," Karen said with a soft laugh. "You've got the heart of a lion, Nayen. But remember, we're not just fighting for your house. We're fighting for your legacy, your future, and everything that belongs to you." "I know," I repeated. "I won't back down." The next morning, I woke up to an unexpected visitor, Ember. She stood at the door, her expression fake as ever, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that looked entirely too expensive for a Sunday afternoon. It was as if she had rehearsed this moment, as if she thought she could still manipulate me into submission. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest. "What do you want?" She smiled, her eyes glittering with false warmth. "I think we need to talk, Nayan. About the house, about the future." I narrowed my eyes. "The future? You think you have a say in that?" "I do," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "This house, Nayan, it's not just yours anymore. You have to realize that. Damon and I are starting a new life, and I think it's time you moved on." I laughed, the sound low and cold. "You're right about one thing. This house isn't just mine, it's my family's legacy. And as for you and Damon, don't think for a second that I'm going to hand it over to you. Not without a fight." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "You don't have a choice, Nayan. Damon's been handling everything. You're not in control anymore." "I'm in control of my future, Ember," I said, stepping forward slightly, my voice hard. "And if you think you're going to walk in here and take what's mine, you're sorely mistaken." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she masked it quickly, her smile returning. "We'll see, won't we?" she said, turning to leave. As she walked away, I felt the final pieces of the puzzle coming together. Ember thought she could manipulate me, control me. She thought she could win, but she had no idea what she was up against. The fight was far from over, but now I was ready for whatever she threw my way. The days that followed Ember's visit were filled with a new kind of tension. I knew that everything had changed. What had once been my life, my home, my family was now something I had to fight for. But I was no longer going to be the passive victim. I was ready to claim what was rightfully mine, and I was determined to fight until the bitter end. Karen had been invaluable, helping me navigate through every legal aspect of this battle. Her expertise and strategic mind made me feel like I wasn't just going through the motions. I was taking control of my future. Together, we had outlined a strategy, one that would ensure Ember and Damon didn't walk away with everything. I spent the following week focusing on gathering more information, organizing everything, and making sure all our legal moves were in place. Every night, after I went to bed, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every interaction with Damon and Ember. The weight of the situation was suffocating at times, but I knew that if I didn't stay focused, they would win. Wade and Sage, who had become an unexpected source of strength and clarity, continued to help me. Wade was resolute in protecting the family legacy, while Sage, despite her hurt and betrayal, never wavered. She stood by me, offering her support and making sure I didn't lose sight of the goal. The bond that had grown between the two of them was something I couldn't have predicted, but it gave me a sense of peace. Whatever happened with Damon and Ember, at least I knew that my son and Sage would be there for me. It was another Saturday when I received a call from Karen. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Nayan, I think it's time we move forward with filing the documents. We've got all the evidence we need. If we don't act now, they might try to get ahead of us." "I agree," I said, my voice firm. "Let's do it." We agreed that I would meet her at the office the following Monday, where we would finalize everything and submit the necessary paperwork to the court. It felt like a relief to finally take that step, but I also knew that it would only escalate the situation. Ember and Damon would fight back, and it would be an ugly battle. Monday arrived, and I felt a quiet determination settle over me. Wade, Sage, and I had all agreed that this was the best course of action, and there was no turning back. As I drove to Karen's office, I kept thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. I was no longer the woman who had been content to simply live quietly in the background. I was fighting for myself, for my future, and I would not be silenced. Karen greeted me with her usual calm demeanor, her dark eyes assessing but warm. "We're ready?" she said, her voice steady as always. "I've got everything prepared. We just need your signature." I nodded, and we sat down at the conference table. I reviewed the documents once more, making sure everything was in order. When I signed the papers, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. Now the battle was officially underway. "Thank you," I said, looking at Karen. "I don't think I could have done this without you."
"Of course," she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You've got the strength, Nayan. You just needed to remember it." As I left the office, the air felt different. The decision had been made, and now I had to see it through. I was in control. Ember and Damon had no idea what was coming. That afternoon, as I returned home, the phone rang. It was Wade. "Mom, you won't believe this," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "What happened?" I asked, my heart suddenly racing. "It's Ember. She's trying to sell the house behind your back. She's convinced that now that you've signed the divorce papers, the house is up for grabs." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "She's not getting away with it, Wade." "I know, but she's already called movers. She's practically planning her new life here. I don't know if she's just desperate or if she truly believes she can take it from you." I clenched my fists. "She's playing a dangerous game. I'll make sure she doesn't get too far. You have my word." I could hear the anger in Wade's voice, and it was a relief. My son, my sweet boy, had grown into a man who was willing to protect what mattered. He wasn't going to let Ember win, and neither was I. Later that evening, Damon called again. I had expected his call, but hearing his voice made something inside me snap.
"Nayan, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're making a huge mistake. This divorce, the trust, it's all going to destroy us," he said, his voice sounding exhausted. "No, Damon, you destroyed us," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences." "You're still angry," he said, frustration rising in his voice. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you." "Don't," I said, cutting him off. "Don't pretend like this is about me. It's about you and Ember. It's about your greed and betrayal." "I never meant for it to be like this," Damon said, his voice faltering. "Maybe you didn't. But it doesn't matter now." I paused, feeling the weight of the finality in my words. "I'm done, Damon. I've made my peace." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then quietly he spoke. "I didn't think you'd ever let go." "I didn't either," I said softly. "But now I know I have to." The next day, I received another surprise. This time it was a call from Detective Martinez. He had been investigating Ember's activities in secret, and it seemed the walls were closing in on her. "Nayan, the detective said I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've discovered that Ember was more involved than we initially thought. She wasn't just planning the fraud, she was actively hiding assets, forging documents. We've got enough now to charge her with more than just fraud." I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. "So she'll pay for this." "We're building a strong case against her," Martinez replied, "and we're looking into her involvement in other matters as well. She's in deep." "Good," I said, feeling a sense of justice settling in. She deserves to face the consequences. As the days passed, Ember's attempts to take control of the house grew more desperate. But I wasn't worried. I knew that the law was on my side now. And when the time came, she would be forced to pay for what she'd done. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own destiny. Ember and Damon thought they could take everything from me, but they had underestimated the strength that ran through my veins. I wasn't just fighting for a house, I was fighting for my dignity, my family, and everything that mattered. And as I sat in my garden, surrounded by the roses that Damon and I had planted together, I knew that no matter what came next, I would not break. I would bend, yes, but I would never break. The week that followed was filled with moments that tested me. The calm I had cultivated was growing fragile as Damon's manipulations took a more desperate turn. As the legal proceedings progressed, I could see him struggling to keep control, while Ember remained silent as if waiting for something to happen. The tension in the air was palpable, but I remained focused, knowing that everything had to be done methodically. I spent most of my time at home, letting Karen and the lawyer handle the legal intricacies. My phone rang constantly with updates from Wade Sage and Detective Martinez.
Every conversation was a small victory as we tightened the noose around Ember's schemes. But even with all the victories, there was still a gnawing sensation that would not leave me. I was winning, yes, but the damage to my family had been done. There were things I would never be able to undo. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visit from Karen. She had been my pillar of strength throughout this ordeal, and the sight of her brought me comfort. She had a briefcase with her, the contents of which could either make or break this entire situation. "Nayan, we're getting closer," she said as I invited her in. "But we need to act quickly. I received a tip that Ember's been trying to liquidate some of the family assets behind your back. She might be working with people we don't know yet." I felt a rush of cold fear wash over me. The thought that Ember might be moving behind the scenes without anyone knowing was terrifying. She had already crossed so many lines, and this would be her final betrayal.
"What can we do?" I asked, my voice tight with worry.
"First, we need to gather any documents she may have forged. I know it sounds like a lot, but I have a feeling that everything she's been doing is more calculated than we initially thought. We'll have to take a more aggressive approach."
"Let's do it," I replied, my resolve hardening.
The very next day, I began to search through everything. The safe deposit box was open. Old family documents were sifted through, and any old correspondence was looked at. It felt like the last part of my life was being cataloged for a future I didn't want, but it was necessary. The deeper I went, the more I uncovered. My once comfortable life was being dismantled by Ember's thirst for power, money, and control. Sage came by to help, and as we pored over the details, we realized just how far Ember had gone. Not only had she been manipulating Damon, but she had also been manipulating the very law that was supposed to protect our family's assets. Everything was linked back to a series of secretive and questionable transactions. "It's all there," Sage whispered as she pulled out a set of papers, a mix of contracts and financial records. "This is what she's been using to cover her tracks." I stared at the documents. The cold fury I had felt for so long began to burn again. I would never allow her to take what was mine, and I would make sure Damon faced the consequences of his actions. This wasn't just about keeping the house. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my legacy, and my self-respect. 2 days later, I got another unexpected call. This time it was Wade. His voice was full of tension and something I couldn't quite place. "Mom, there's something you need to know. I got a call from Ember. She says she wants to meet."
"Meet?" I asked, frowning. "What does she want?"
"I'm not sure, but I think she's planning something. She wants to settle everything, but you know how she is. I don't trust her." I paused, considering the possibility of meeting her face to face. I had no idea what she was capable of, but I was done being afraid. "Tell her I'll meet her tomorrow," I said firmly. "We'll settle this once and for all." The following day, I met Ember at the cafe near her office, the place where it all started. She was dressed impeccably, as always, a perfect picture of the woman who had tried to destroy everything I held dear. Her cold blue eyes studied me with a mixture of disdain and triumph as she sipped her coffee.
"Nayan," she said, her voice dripping with fall sweetness. "I thought it was time we had a proper conversation. It's been hard on all of us, hasn't it?" I could barely hide my contempt. "What exactly is it that you want, Ember?" She leaned forward, her lips curling into a smile. "I just want you to understand that I never meant for things to go this far. Damon and I, we were just looking for a way to be happy. You can't blame us for that, can you?" I felt my blood run cold. Her words were calculated, manipulative, but I wasn't going to let her win. "I don't blame you," I said slowly, "but what you did was more than just about your happiness. You ruined a family. You destroyed trust, and you stole from me, from all of us."
She laughed, her eyes flashing with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Still, you make it sound so dramatic. This house, the money, is just a house, Nine. It's just stuff."
"Stuff," I echoed, my voice hardening.
That stuff is the legacy of my family. That house has been in my family for generations. You think you can just take it?" Her smile faltered for the briefest of moments, but she quickly recovered. "You don't understand. It was never going to be yours. Damon and I were always going to be together. You can't change that." I leaned in, locking eyes with her. "You've already lost Ember. You've lost Damon. You've lost everything. And when this is over, you'll lose everything else." Her expression shifted, the facade slipping for just a second. "We'll see about that." The following week was filled with legal wrangling, more evidence gathering, and strategic moves from both sides. But with each passing day, it became clearer to me that Ember was running out of time. The walls were closing in, and the final showdown was near. I had no intention of letting her get away with it. I stood strong, knowing that soon the truth would come out. This game was almost over. The tension that had been building for weeks finally reached its peak when I walked into the courtroom. I had always imagined that the end of a marriage after 42 years would be a quiet affair, perhaps a peaceful separation. I never expected it to come to this, a battle for everything I had worked so hard to protect. But here we were. Damon and Ember were on one side, sitting with their attorney looking so smug that it almost sickened me. Wade was beside me, his face a mask of anger and betrayal, while Sage, quietly supportive, sat in the gallery. I had no idea how things would unfold. The truth had been laid out in front of everyone, the trust provisions, the forgery, the fraud. I was calm on the surface, but beneath it all, there was a fire burning. This wasn't just about the house or the assets. It was about sending a message. Ember needed to be held accountable, and Damon needed to understand the full extent of the damage he had caused. The trial began promptly with the usual formalities. Our attorney, Patricia Chen, was sharp and meticulous, outlining every piece of evidence we had gathered. I sat, listening intently as she went over the fraudulent documents, the insurance policy that Ember had forged in my name, and the conversations we had recorded. But the real bombshell was when Patricia introduced the trust documents, the ones that detailed the provisions that were set in place decades ago to protect my family's legacy. "Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice firm, "the provisions in this trust are clear. In the event of adultery, the offending party loses all claim to any assets connected to it. The house, the business, the investments, they are not Damon's to claim. And most importantly, the actions of Mr. Morrison and Mrs. Holbrook cannot be ignored." I could feel Ember's eyes on me, full of venom. She had no idea just how tightly the noose was getting. Damon, too, seemed on edge, trying to maintain his composure, but I could see his hand shaking slightly as he held his water bottle. Then it was time for Damon to speak. He stood looking as though he had rehearsed this moment for days. He cleared his throat and addressed the court. "Your Honor, I made a mistake, a big mistake," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "But this was supposed to be a private matter, a family matter. I don't deserve to lose everything because of one lapse in judgment." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. This man, who I had loved for over 4 decades, had just tried to make himself out to be the victim. He wasn't the victim. He was the perpetrator. "You don't deserve anything," I muttered under my breath, but I knew the court wouldn't hear it. The judge, a stern woman with years of experience, glanced at Damon. "Mr. Morrison, this is not a case of a mistake. This is a case of calculated betrayal, both to your wife and to the trust that has been in place for generations. You knew the consequences of your actions, and you chose to ignore them." Damon looked down, his shoulders slumping. It was the first time I had seen him look small, vulnerable. But it wasn't enough to make me feel sorry for him. Ember was the next to speak. She stood, her voice trembling as she tried to justify her actions. "Your Honor, I had no intention of causing harm. I was just in love," she said, her voice high-pitched and defensive. "I didn't plan any of this. Damon and I were just looking for happiness." The judge cut her off before she could continue. "Mrs. Holbrook, your actions have not been about seeking happiness. They have been about greed and deceit. Your manipulations have been thoroughly documented." The final blow came when Patricia presented the evidence about the life insurance policy that Ember had forged in my name. "This is clear evidence of intent to defraud Mrs. Morrison," Patricia said. "The policy was forged without her consent, and the beneficiary was changed to Mrs. Holbrook." Ember's face turned pale as the implication sank in. The room buzzed with whispers, and I could hear Wade's sharp intake of breath as he clenched his fists.
"This is a felony," Patricia continued. "Mrs. Holbrook planned to financially ruin her mother-in-law while she was already betraying her husband. She didn't just ruin a marriage. She was setting up a future where she benefited from the death of Mrs. Morrison."
At this point, Ember's composure completely cracked. She sputtered, "You can't prove it. You don't have enough evidence." "I don't need to prove it anymore," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "The evidence speaks for itself. You've played your game, and now the consequences are here." The judge turned to Ember. "Mrs. Holbrook, you will be held accountable for your actions. This court will take into consideration the severity of your deception and the fraud you have committed against Mrs. Morrison, along with the emotional damage you've inflicted on her family." Damon, clearly defeated, slumped into his seat as the gravity of the situation hit him. He had no idea that this was coming, and now he was facing the end of everything he had taken for granted. After hours of deliberation and closing statements, the judge called for a recess, and I walked out of the courtroom with Patricia. My legs were shaky, my head spinning from everything I had just heard. But I felt a sense of calm, a sense of justice finally being served. That night, I stood in my garden staring at the moonlit roses that Damon and I had planted all those years ago. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding on to until this moment. But now, I was letting go. I wasn't just standing here as his wife or as a victim. I was standing here as Minen Morrison, the woman who had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger.
"Sage," I whispered into the night. "This is just the beginning." The days following the courtroom battle were filled with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Ember and Damon were reeling from the consequences of their actions, and the weight of what they had done was beginning to sink in. But for me, the most significant change wasn't the courtroom victory. It was the realization that I had reclaimed my power. The years of silence, of putting others first, had been shattered. I had taken control of my life, and there was no turning back. Wade was by my side, his support unwavering. Sage, too, had become an invaluable ally. Her loyalty and honesty had been a lifeline throughout this ordeal. And even though the legal battles were far from over, I knew one thing: the worst was behind me. It was on a brisk Thursday morning that I got the call from Patricia Chen. 9. Her voice was calm but serious. "The judge has ruled. The trust provisions are ironclad and Ember's claims have been dismissed. Your assets are fully protected." I let out a sigh of relief, but it was followed by a wave of sadness. This victory, while sweet, couldn't erase the years of pain caused by the betrayal of the two people I had trusted most. I had spent my entire life building a family, a legacy, and now it felt as though it had all been turned into a game. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice steady. "But I won't rest until I know everything is resolved. I want to ensure Ember faces the full consequences of her actions."
"We're working on it," Patricia assured me. The investigation into the insurance fraud and the forgery is progressing, but Nan, it's time for you to start thinking about what's next. What do you mean? I asked, surprised. You've already survived the storm. Now it's time to rebuild your life. You've got a fresh start ahead of you. Her words resonated with me in ways I couldn't articulate. Rebuilding my life. What did that mean exactly? I had spent so many years as Damon's wife, as Wade's mother, that I had lost track of who I was as an individual. It was then that I realized what I needed to do. I wasn't just going to sit back and let the aftermath of this disaster define me. I was going to take control, create something meaningful out of this mess. I had the downtown condo from the divorce settlement, something Ember had thought would be my consolation prize. I decided right then and there that I was going to turn it into something new, something empowering. I started making calls, gathering information, and drawing up plans. The condo would be transformed into a refuge for women who were rebuilding their lives after divorce. It would be a place of healing, of empowerment, where women could take time for themselves and rediscover their strength. No more being the victim. No more being silenced. I spent the next few weeks in a whirlwind of activity. The condo was gutted and completely renovated with a cozy, welcoming atmosphere. I enlisted Sage to help with the interior design, and we filled it with light, airy colors and soft furnishings. I wanted this space to be more than just a place to stay. I wanted it to be a sanctuary, a place where women could heal, find peace, and move forward. It became a labor of love, and with each decision I made, I felt more in control of my destiny. Meanwhile, Wade was doing his part, working tirelessly to help with the legal side of things. Ember's fraudulent activities were being uncovered one by one. The police were investigating the forged insurance policy, and the details surrounding her Aunt Eleanor's suspicious death were being examined with increasing scrutiny. Every time I thought about Eleanor, I felt a pang of guilt. She had been so kind to me, and I had never imagined that Ember's betrayal could have extended so far. Wade had also started to rebuild his life. He was no longer the man who had been manipulated by Ember's lies. He was beginning to find himself again, and it made my heart swell with pride. We spent more time together talking about the future, planning for what would come next. One evening, as I sat in the newly furnished condo, taking in the view of the city's skyline, I received another call. This time it was from Detective Martinez. It was from Mrs. Morrison, he said, his voice tinged with a mix of satisfaction and finality. We've got enough evidence to proceed with charges against Ember. We've found more than just the forged documents. There's a pattern of behavior here, and the district attorney is confident we'll have a strong case. I leaned back in my chair, a sense of calm washing over me. The legal battles were far from over, but now I was no longer fighting alone. The strength of my family, the support of people like Sage and Wade, and the resolve I had found within myself, all of these things were coming together. And for the first time in months, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Over the next few weeks, Ember's world began to unravel. Her deceitful schemes had been exposed, and there was no hiding from the consequences. The police arrested her for insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. There were also ongoing investigations into her role in Eleanor's death. Her arrest was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also a form of justice. Ember had sought to tear apart everything I held dear, but in the end, she was the one who was destroyed by her own actions. Damon, for his part, was not entirely off the hook either. While there was no direct evidence linking him to Eleanor's death, his role in the affair and the fraud schemes had made him an accomplice. He was charged as an accessory, and it seemed that the world he had so carefully constructed for himself was crumbling. I stood at the window of the condo, watching the city lights flicker below. and allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey I had been on had been long and painful, but it had also been transformative. I had faced betrayal, loss, and uncertainty, but I had also found my own strength. The woman who had once been consumed by the needs of others was now someone who could stand on her own, proud and resilient. Wade came by later that evening, and as we sat together in the condo, I shared my plans for the future. "I've always wanted to help others, Wade," I said. "This condo is just the beginning. I want to create a place where women can rebuild their lives, reclaim their power. I've got so much left to give, and I'm not going to let this define me." Wade smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. "I knew you were strong, Mom," he said, "but I didn't know you were this strong. I'm so proud of you." Sage joined us a few minutes later, and as we all sat together talking about the future, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was my new beginning. This was my future. And no one, not Ember, not Damon, not anyone would ever take that away from me. The days following the whirlwind of legal proceedings and personal upheaval were surprisingly calm. The world, it seemed, had a way of moving forward, and so had I. The condo, which had once been a symbol of my loss, had now become a symbol of my strength and resilience. It was a place of healing, not just for me, but for others as well. It had taken me time, but I had finally embraced the fact that I was no longer defined by my marriage or by the betrayal of my former husband and daughter-in-law. I was Nan Morrison, a woman with a future to build. Wade and Sage continued to be my steady support, and as time passed, I saw them both flourish. Sage, who had once been caught in the webs of deceit and manipulation spun by her sister, had become a beacon of honesty and strength. She and Wade had grown closer, and I had a deep sense of peace knowing that they were both finding their own paths. Their connection was built on mutual respect and shared pain. But more than that, it was built on the strength that comes from facing life's harshest truths together. The first woman arrived at the condo a month after its completion. She was in her mid-40s, her face marked by years of hardship. Her name was Teresa, and she had just gone through a difficult divorce. She was hesitant at first, unsure of what to expect, but as I guided her through the space, she began to relax. The cozy living room, the calm, serene bedroom, the kitchen filled with warmth. It was more than just a place to stay. It was a space where she could rediscover herself. Sage and I spent hours with Teresa, talking about her life, her journey, and her hopes for the future. I listened to her fears and her dreams, and in return, I shared my own story. It was cathartic, not just for her, but for me as well. I realized that this condo, this new life I was building, was not just for me to heal, but for others who had been hurt, who had been broken, and who needed a place to start again. The following week, I received a call from Patricia Chen. The police had made significant progress in the investigation into Ember and Damon. It turned out that Ember had not only orchestrated the insurance fraud and forged documents, but had also been involved in a larger scheme to manipulate several family members, including my late Aunt Eleanor. The police had found more evidence linking her to suspicious activities, including a series of forged documents and deceitful financial transactions that had been designed to drain our family's wealth. Though the legal battles were still ongoing, there was a sense of closure that had begun to settle over me. Ember was facing the consequences of her actions, and the damage she had done to my family was finally being exposed to the world. But what surprised me the most was the fact that I didn't feel the anger I had once thought would consume me. Instead, I felt a deep sense of relief, of peace. The woman I had once called my daughter-in-law, the woman who had betrayed me so completely, was unraveling under the weight of her lies. Damon, too, was facing his own reckoning. The guilt he had tried to suppress was now catching up to him. His world built on deception and infidelity was collapsing around him. He had always believed that he could escape the consequences of his actions, but the truth had a way of catching up with even the most calculated of minds. As much as I wanted to feel anger toward him, all I could muster was indifference. The man who had once been my husband no longer held any power over me. His betrayal had stripped away any affection I had left for him. One evening, as I sat in the living room of the condo, I received an unexpected call. It was from Wade. He sounded distant, his voice tinged with sadness. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," he said.
"Of course, sweetheart," I replied, my heart tightening at the tone of his voice. "What's going on?"
"I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," he began. "About Ember, about Dad, about our family, and I think I finally understand what you've been through." I didn't say anything at first, waiting for him to continue. It's hard to process everything," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I trusted them both. I thought they were good people. But now everything feels like a lie." I could hear the pain in his voice, and it made my heart ache. It was never easy to watch your child suffer, especially when you had already suffered so much yourself.
"You're not alone in this, Wade," I said gently. "I've been where you are now, but you've got something they don't: integrity. You've got the truth, and that's all you need to move forward."
There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then finally, Wade spoke again, his voice stronger this time. "Thanks, Mom. I think I need to forgive myself before I can move forward. I've been so angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, but I realize now that I can't change the past. All I can do is be better moving forward." I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "That's all anyone can do, sweetheart. We can't change the past, but we can always choose how we move forward." As I hung up the phone, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Wade was growing into the man I had always hoped he would be: strong, kind, and filled with integrity. And with Sage by his side, I knew that they would both find a way to heal from this. The next few months were filled with small victories. Ember was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including insurance, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Damon, too, was implicated in the scheme, and while he wasn't facing charges as severe as Ember's, his role as an accessory was clear. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that their carefully crafted world was crumbling. They had underestimated the power of truth, and they had underestimated me. But even as Ember and Damon faced their legal battles, I realized that the real victory had already been won. I had reclaimed my power. I had stood up to the betrayal, the lies, and the deceit. And I had built something new, something meaningful. I had built a future for myself, and I was no longer defined by the mistakes of others. As I stood in the kitchen of my condo, surrounded by the warmth of family and friends, I knew that this was just the beginning. The future was filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see where it would take me. The winds of change had blown through my life, tearing down the old structures that no longer served me. But in the aftermath, something beautiful had emerged. I had built a new foundation, one that was strong, secure, and filled with the love and support of those who truly mattered. And as I looked ahead to the future, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready. I was Nyan Morrison, and I was unstoppable.